Good morning and welcome to the Irving-Las Colinas Changemaker series, Best Business Practices Discussion. I'm David Pfaff, Chairman of the five-star Greater Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce and President of Plastronics Socket Company. During these unprecedented times our country is experiencing, we wanted to create a platform for stakeholders and changemakers to share their efforts and views, as we did last month with the first installment of our Changemaker series discussing race relations. For today's discussion, we've compiled a panel of experts to discuss best business practices that organizations of all sizes can implement to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion. At this time, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Ty Bledsoe is the Assistant Vice President of External Governmental Affairs at AT&T. He is responsible for the company's legislative interests among federal, state, and local elected officials across most of North Texas. He sits on the board at the Chamber and is the Vice Chairman of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Please welcome Ty Bledsoe.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. It is an honor and privilege to join you all this morning, and I want to just welcome our audience that is live on Facebook, our audience that is live in other streaming sources, and we're going to kick the tires and light the fires. Let me start by introducing our illustrious executive panel. And I just want to say this before we start. Today, we're going to talk about best practices in the private sector, in the corporate arena, but I believe these best practices are applicable to those in the nonprofit space, definitely for small business owners, and even for those who are entrepreneurs, as we say, solopreneurs that are looking perhaps to scale their business. Without further ado, let's have the introduction of our panelists. First, we have Mike Gonzalez. He's president of Armstrong Relocation based in Dallas. He leads the company's efforts in sales and oversees a diverse and talented team of relocation professionals. Mike worked for Armstrong Relocation in college as a part-time loader and packer, then as a staff accountant for 34 years prior to his promotion to president in 2008. Mike has played an active role in all aspects in growing Armstrong from a small moving company to one of Dallas's largest relocation companies. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. Let me introduce our next guest. I should say our next featured panelist is Mr. Mike McCall. Mike McCall is a senior vice president in the business management team of Citi's Global Consumer Technology Digital Organization. In this role, he supports a variety of initiatives to attract, develop, and retain top talent. This includes financial planning and forecasting, technical recruiting, diversity programs, mentorship, productivity enhancements, culture, and an office remodel project. Thank you, Mr. McCall. And our third panelist and featured guest is Ms. Heather Herndon Wright, is a director of supply chain diversity for Vistra Corporation. This role leads the effort. In this role, Heather leads the effort for the development, promotion, and oversight of a national strategy and architecture to increase the inclusion and growth of both diverse and small business enterprises across the supply chain, from suppliers to channel partners. Ms. Herndon Wright has led several diversity positions in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors. Welcome, guests, and let's start the conversation. First question that's really top of mind here, everybody. I'm just going to ask it. We talk about DI, and the chairman had described that. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's open it up. Why is DEI important to your business and your organization?
I'll be happy to start, Ty. This is Heather Herndon Wright. Vistra Energy, or Vistra Corporation now, produces electricity. We produce it, we generate it, and we sell it. So for us, it's very important that we have an organization, a supply chain that matches our customer base. So we know at the end of the day, you can choose who to select as your electricity provider. We want to be that electricity provider. So we want to ensure that our supply chain and our people represent and reflect the customers.
Yep. And to add on to that, for us at Citi, same thing. I mean, we're a global company. Our customer base is extremely diverse, and we're going to serve them better if we can match that diversity internally. But even beyond that, you get the best ideas when you have a diverse and inclusive culture. If you have everybody who's from the same background and thinks the same way, and other viewpoints are kind of, pushed to the side, does that sound like a business that's going to be successful to anybody? It's definitely our view that you're going to be better and stronger when you invite more people to the conversation and bring in more ideas. And that's really where diversity and inclusion isn't just a nice to have thing. It's really something that makes you more successful as a company.
Hey, Ty, and here at Armstrong, we believe the very same things. We work with a lot of different companies, a lot of diverse companies. But I think really the main component I look at is this should be important to every organization, no matter what they do, how they do it. I think in this day and age, we need to be leading in those areas. And a lot of that comes from the leaders that are not only in our organization, but in all the organizations. And let's be truthful that, as a business, we want to do business with companies that are like us, that do the right thing. And I think it's important that we show the companies we work with that that's what we're about. And so I think they feel good about doing business with us. And let's face it, we're all trying to grow our business. And I think that's part of growing our business. So I think that's why it's important to me, particularly as a leader of this organization.
Mike, I have as a small business executive, I have a question for you, right?
Sure.
Let's think about this, right? So let us know where are you looking for inspiration or resources to build your initiatives and priorities?
And Ty, that's a good question, because I can tell you, I was talking to Dexter a little bit about that, because, we're not in the same plateau as some of these large organizations. And to be truthful with you, we don't have the budgets to say, hey, I'm going to have this staff member, handle this, to look at inclusion and make sure that we're able to monitor those things. So a lot of that comes from our leadership. And one of the things that I grew up a long time ago is the idea that, hey, we have to do the right thing, no matter how we look at it. So I think a lot of times I'm looking at my leadership team to help make those things happen. Those are the guys that I typically get ideas from. They're the ones that look at inclusion. They're the ones that say, hey, this is what we need to do to assist, all individuals in our organization to grow with our organization, to show that we, do the right thing and being fair with everybody, how we treat everybody. We look at that and we manage that by meetings with my top staff. But that doesn't mean that I don't look at companies like AT&T and some of the other large companies that we work with that are, what I say are pretty all-stars in that area. And so I'm able to, I hate to say this, but I can steal some ideas from those guys, because they do have the staff. So it's not unlike that's one of the resources I do get from belonging to chambers and organizations that allow me to mingle with large companies such as those and meet quality individuals that kind of share those ideas. So, that's one of the ways with it we do that. And it's, and we also get some advantages from our trade organizations, American Trucking Association. They help us stay on task of what we need to be doing to helping, all the different nationalities to grow their business. And, our businesses are a little different than most in the fact that we've got what we call owner operators. So not only do I have employees, but I've got owner operators that we try and assist and help them grow their businesses and put them in that same mold. And we have to train them, because they have to look at us and say, hey, these guys are doing the right thing every day. And this is what they're doing for their employees. This is what they're doing for on taking care of their employees and how we handle them and make sure that we do, that we're not prejudiced and biased. Because as you heaven knows, it's so easy to fall into that without even realizing that you're doing it. So I think that's a key of us constantly monitoring our leadership team.
Mike, I thank you for definitely for offering that perspective and insight, and making me think of a couple of things, right? Talking about doing the right thing. I was spending time with a leader with a national Asian Pacific Islander organization, and he said, hey, look, my philosophy is to do the right thing the right way all the time, right? And so it just made me think about that also talking about bias, unconscious bias is a big component, right? Influencers, decision makers have to deal with this. And, we may talk about that a little bit more in this conversation, right? How unconscious or implicit bias is a part of some of these decisions historically, but it's definitely something that we need to be able to address going forward, particularly in the private sector and also in the nonprofit arena. But Ms. Heather, I have a question. I'm just thinking here, right? So Vistra Energy, right? You all have done well, right? Internally, right? But as we said, AT&T, at least as I said, AT&T, right? We can still do better, right? So I'm wondering, how do you manage and measure the success of DEI initiatives your company has implemented?
So it's really interesting. We're kind of on a different journey. I think it is a continuous journey, right? You don't ever end. You're always doing better. You're always going further. We've had a fantastic supply chain diversity initiative since 1989. Always supported from the top down. To Mike McCall's point, it's something that we know brings us better solutions. Creative approaches. We have different perspectives. We have different people looking at things differently, so we can find the best way to approach a solution. So we've always had a very robust and strong supply chain diversity initiative. We have not necessarily had a very focused internal D&I initiative for our workforce, because we've been one of the best places to work in Dallas for years and years and years. We really kind of almost had the mentality, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Our people love being here. We're all very diverse. We're very inclusive. But in the wake of the George Floyd murder, we had a CEO that stepped up and said, you know what? And I think we had very many enlightened CEOs at that time. I don't think they all talked to each other and decided they're going to do this. They just, many did it. And he said, we're going to look and see what we have. We're going to listen. So we started a series of listening sessions, and he is on, I think he's done 21 or 22 to date. And we just invited employees from across the company. So from our power plants and our generation side of the business out in the rural areas across the country, to the corporate area, to our retail side, which are a lot of millennials, a lot of the younger folks. So really generations, ethnicities, genders, LGBT, people with disabilities or differently abled. So we had veterans, we had all of that in these listening sessions. And so not only was Kurt Morgan, our CEO, part of that, but his executive leadership team was part of that. Because in his mind, you don't know what you don't know. Let's just listen and see. And found out there were so many things, not just necessarily what happens at work, but you bring your life to work, right? Things that happen to you throughout your entire life are what form you and who you are. And that becomes who you bring to work and what your perspective and that filter that you bring. So really hearing some of those stories has been very eye-opening. So we're really just starting the journey of a formal DE&I program on the workforce side. So starting with these listening sessions, we're baselining and benchmarking right now, which this can be for large companies or small companies, right? Really looking at your data, knowing what you've got. One of the things we found, which I think many large corporations find, is we have great inclusion and representation, which I think is an important part, right? We look at diversity, we look at inclusion, we look at equity, but we also need to look at representation. It goes up to a certain level. Once you get past that level, it just kind of becomes very homogeneous. So that's one of the things we're baselining now, identifying what we can do to better enable career paths, so that we're intentionally looking at how do we increase that representation throughout all levels and across the business. So for us, it's a journey. We're at kind of the beginning phases of it, even though we're a large corporation. On this side, we really thought we were doing well in it until we stopped and looked and listened. So that would be our recommendation as a best practice, is really stop, look at your employee base, listen to them, hear what their life experiences are, because that does bring value to your company in general and how you run the business, but it'll also help you be able to grow your people so you can grow your company.
You got to grow your people before you grow your company. Listen, you entrepreneurs, you C-suites, those rising in corporate America, right? You got to invest in your people. So Mr. McCall, right? So I'm interested, right? So Citi, right? Big in the financial world, right? Access to capital, right? Community reinvestment, right? All those good components. Now you all work more on a national or global level as opposed to more of a kind of a local level. So let me know, how's the effort going at Citi in this space of DE&I, and how are you measuring your leaders? I'm particularly interested. Do you have a scorecard? Do you have an EG, diversity inclusion conference? How's it going, Mike?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So We do have scorecards. We do have metrics that are tracked. There's a lot of discussion right now about our recruiting targets and hiring practices and making sure that we're hitting the diversity targets that City has set. And those have been released publicly, which I think is always an important part of that process to hold yourselves accountable. I know for me, whenever I see anyone in corporate America publish a scorecard target, I know how these places work and they're going to go hit it, right? So I appreciate that there's been some transparency around that. And so for our hiring targets and kind of looking at the makeup of our employee population, that's been a big focus. For me, it's one thing to make sure that you're hiring diverse talent, but it's another to make sure you're supporting them and making sure that when they get here, they find an environment that they feel like they can thrive in and they can be comfortable in and where they have support. And so things that we have at City that we're proud of would be our affinity networks. So we have 10 of them. They go back as far as 18 years. And those aren't just around, your race or your gender, but we also have ones for veterans or those with disabilities or parents or the LGBTQ community. And the cool thing about those networks is, I can join the Black Heritage Network. I can go to their events. I can participate in being an advocate. And it really is a way to bring people together, share culture, give people mentorship and a sense of community. And I think that is really important because not only does it give people a place where they belong, but it also creates a voice internally for these groups of people and make sure that that's going to be heard for our leadership team, because we really have buy-in at the executive level for people to be sponsors of those networks. And so I think that's been a really important step for us as well. And then we have outreach programs. So one thing, even locally here in Dallas, that I'm really proud to be a part of is our Women in IT initiative. So, women, Blacks, and Hispanics are all very underrepresented in the tech industry. And in 2014, we were able to create a program for women where we go out to middle and high schools to try to get girls interested in pursuing careers in technology. And then we have internships and further engagement with them all the way through college. And we're now getting to the point where we have girls who started with us as sophomores in high school and are now joining us full time after they finish college. So it's programs like that are just really great and rewarding to participate in. You're doing good, and also your employees love doing it. And it just kind of builds this shared sense that these initiatives are important. We got a long way to go, still have a lot of work to do. I mean, I think we can be doing more at the community level with Black and Hispanic talent, and that's definitely something we've been talking about a lot lately. And then kind of building out our mentorship internally in a more robust manner. We do have lots of employee surveying that happens throughout the year to ensure that people feel like they're in an inclusive environment where they're free to speak up and they feel like people like them are supported. So that's part of how this is tracked as well.
Hey, Ty, I'd like to chime in on that just a little bit.
Please, Mike. Yes.
One of the things I like to notate or talk about is leading inclusively, which I try and keep my managers and leaders to understand that they need to kind of be active and intentionally and ongoing to promote full participation and a sense of belonging to all our employees. Because I think that's sometimes so easily lacking because we're not including everybody and making a true effort for them to really bring them in to get their ideas, to share their thoughts, and ultimately to hope to promote them within our organization. So I always kind of use that leading inclusively as a key component for my leaders.
Look at this, Mr. Gonzalez. Look, and I'm just going to say it right. We're talking about leading inclusively, and so when we think of DE&I, it's a phrase that I've been using for a bit, and I adopted this from my second mother, Cynthia Marshall, who's the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks, the former SVP and Chief Diversity Officer at AT&T. And I say this, wherever an opportunity, right, that diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance, and equity is being empowered to select the song you dance to, right? So you need all those three, because without one, it's really not, it's a lot more than just bias, right? For all of our attendees, I have a quick note. Please submit your questions to the Q&A option. Please submit those questions. We want to receive those questions. I'm looking forward to seeing those. I believe one is coming already, but you can click down below under Q&A, submit those questions, and we will do our best to ask those questions to our panelists. And so we're going to move forward. And now let's just get a little bit more candid, right? And I'm going to preface this before we go into another set of questions. let's talk about systemic racism and institutional racism. And the reason why this is important, particularly, is because now we are in the era, in a woken environment. The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and too many, I should say, unarmed African Americans, not only this year, but in the last recent years, has really just shook the core of this nation. It has shook the moral fiber of this country. It has also caused frustration and, in some instances, outrage among millennials, Xers, and even Gen Zers. And that's contributed to protests. It's contributed to just an active, robust conversation with those in multiple demographics. And the reason why that comes up is because now we're in the midst of corporate leaders, policymakers, nonprofit leaders looking to do three things: listen, learn, and act. And the action component is the big component that's really about causing change. On the systemic side, as you all may know, and for our audience, just in case, just for some edification, systemic regards our laws, our regulations, our policies at the local, state, and national level. That's systems. So those of you who are familiar with Jim Crow laws, right, that was systematic legal segregation. You talk about the post-Reconstruction of the South. Those were systematic items that kept an economic and a systemic barriers for people of color and those who were, in a sense, less regarded in community. But as we move into the institutional component of racism or institutional bias, that's in the realm of nonprofit organizations, private sector companies, corporate America. Those are institutions that we have the ability, those on this call have the chance to be able to not only change the culture, but change the policies and change the behavior. One example is that people end up hiring folks who look like them and have a background like them, and then promote and develop those. And Mike McCall was talking about with Citi is where they're looking to change, and they've been working on developing ways that employees not only are given meaning, but they're given them opportunities to develop their careers and progress their careers within the company. So let's go into this realm. Let's go there and let's find out what these leaders are doing in the systemic and institutional side, but particularly on the institutional side. Let's open this up. What do you see as institutional and systematic inequalities, inequities, I should say, in the current economic infrastructure?
I'll be happy to start that one. I think one of the things that we found through these listening sessions is, and I think all of it goes all the way back more recently, in the most recent history, back to redlining, right, in the 1930s, and really what impact that had on education, and not in people of color not having the same levels or access to education that others did, particularly in the white suburban areas. So because of that, today, if we have requirements that they have to have a college degree or they have to have some level of education around a position, it can keep people with great experience and great capability out of even being considered. They don't even make it past that first cut. So one of the things we're looking at right now is adjusting some of our hiring requirements to say, you know what, let's look at experience and background, not just the educational requirements. But at the same time, we are working to provide funding to some of our historical Black colleges and universities. So Prairie View A&M, we've made a 5-year commitment to. Paul Quinn College, we made a 5-year commitment to. For any of you out there that don't know about Paul Quinn College, they have a work study program. So we've got interns that are coming from there that are doing great things for us that ultimately, hopefully, we'll be able to hire. So there's a whole lot of opportunity in that space to take institutional racism, unconscious bias, things you don't even realize that are there that we've heard through these listening sessions, to say, you know, we can make some real quick changes on that in our hiring requirements, and just have experience as important as education, and making sure that we get the right people for the job. Looking at maybe possibly even removing some names that would cause that unconscious bias from it, and having it really looking at just capabilities, past experience. So a lot of unique things we're looking to benchmark with the cities and the AT&Ts of the world as well. We're big believers in R&D, rip off and duplicate. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's doing it well, let's take that and build it into our people, that it fits our profile. So we kind of vistricize it, but it's something that really does fit in based on what you guys have already learned out there. So we're really looking at creating some new things as well as using some tried and true efforts that have proven to be able to enable us to have better representation throughout the employee base.
Love that. So Vistra is investing into our HBCUs, right? That is tremendous. There's great talent at our HBCUs. And yes, in the DFW, we are honored to have Paul Quinn in our midst right here. Shout out to
And one thing, Ty, if I could just add to that real quickly too, I think it's so important, and Vistra believes it's so important that that's sustainable, that it's not just a one and done, that it's over a period of time commitment. So we've committed $10 million over the next 5 years, and we'll probably renew that, but at least just to start. In addition to the HBCUs, we committed several $100,000 to the National Minority Supplier Development Council, one for the Rebuilding Relief Fund, and then another one to the Business Consortium Fund for long-term loans, low interest loans. So we're looking at some of the short-term solutions to really help in this pandemic time, plus some of the effects of some of the violence in the protests, not the protests, but the violent part. And then the long-term solution with business growth and development through loans. So I think it's important that it's sustainable. It's over a period of time. We can't just get caught up in the emotion of the day right now. But, and I think that's where our corporate CEOs and our corporate leadership is stepping up to say, this has got to be long-term. That's how we're going to eliminate the institutional racism.
Wow. Listen, this is tremendous. And so I'm going to go into for a moment here. So when people start talking about the key sectors in the private sector, particularly in the medium to large cap companies, supply diversity is critical. And I think, panelists, that a lot of our influential people and a lot of members of the public are not aware of the dollar amount that's in, I would say, supply chain or procurement. That's the larger audience, right? It's really procurement. For those of you just look at procurement, supplier diversity is a part of the global supply chain procurement organization infrastructures. You can create through a tier 1 contract, which is a direct contract opportunity with any of our companies, or a tier 2, which means you would be a contractor of the prime, right? It's called a subcontractor, called tier 1 or tier 2. Just trying to give you some term edification here. But you can create thousandaires, 100,000aires, and millionaires just by identifying those who are either established or rising or even emerging minority. We use the word MBEs, right? Minority business enterprises. I don't like using the word minority because a minor is someone that can't drink, right? No. People of color aren't minors. People with of impaired abilities are not minors, but that's the term that we use in the industry, right? But that is an important factor because the work that you're doing, Heather, really can create and sustain hundreds and thousands of jobs, and it really can change generations. And so I have a question that came from our audience, and this is for Mike McCall, right? So one of our virtual attendees is asking, what kind of mentorship programs does Citi have for minority employees in tech? And how can these programs be accessed?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest one and kind of the most fleshed out one that I mentioned is our Women in IT program. And so that's given us a pretty big pipeline of women into the tech industry. We're next focusing on Black and Hispanic talent in the tech industry. So in the past, we've partnered with HBCUs. We've partnered with groups like the National Society of Black Engineers to bring in talent and bring in interns and give them an opportunity. And one thing that we found that was really important is, if you go to a career fair and you look for the college senior who's already got all the lines on the resume that you're looking for, and they can really knock an interview out of the park, that's great. You're going to bring in great talent that way, but you're probably hiring somebody that one of your competitors would have hired anyway. I don't know that we've really increased the number or the amount of representation in the industry by recruiting that way. So to us, the thing that's more impactful is how can we reach students that are freshmen or sophomores or a little bit earlier in their journey? And maybe they're not getting the mentorship or the coaching or the resources that they need. How can we intervene then and get them more opportunities? Maybe they don't even end up working at Citi at the end of the day, but as long as they go on to have a happy and successful career, we've moved the needle. And so I think that's the way that we're trying to think about this. And so, at a national level, Citi has partnerships with a bunch of HBCUs and major universities that they partner with on diversity initiatives. But for us, even here locally, we've been meeting as a group to say, okay, Can we go to Paul Quinn? Can we go to some of these schools here in Texas and Louisiana that maybe don't have the resources that UT Austin has? You know, in my department, we recruit a lot of software engineers, enormously competitive, very lucrative career. If you go to UT Austin, it's us and Microsoft and Facebook all fighting for the same people, right? But where are the schools where that's not happening, and where can we increase access for people? That's really what we want to get involved with. So as far as how you can engage with that, if you work at Citi, ping me right now, literally right now. I want to see your face pop up. If you don't, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to work with you on this, because I think there's a lot of things that we can do with each other together across company lines to work with some of these schools, even at a high school level here locally, to make sure that we're giving people more opportunities.
Okay.
Hey, Ty, can I jump on that?
Yes, yes.
You know, you talked a little bit about institutional and systemic racism, which, you know, I think we all know there's no room for either one of those. And during my growth in several years ago, when I was younger in this business, hey, I experienced some of that stuff, and trust me, it's no fun. So it's something that we try to eliminate. But as we look at providing opportunities, and you know, in my business, you know, we've probably got more blue collar than we do white collar, and so that's important to know that. So I think in order to provide opportunities for any colors, you know, we give them the opportunity to come into our organization. You know, we outfit them with equipment, we finance it for them, we help train them in regards to, hey, learning your own finances as a small businessman, and they become an owner operator, so that they've got the ability to, in fact, you know, improve, you know, their life in regards to, you know, their family, their, you know, residences that they live in, and their finances, so that they can grow and then they buy additional trucks. They become essentially their own businessman in their own business. And we help them walk them through that whole process so that they can get to that next level. And I think that's key in regards to the mentoring of helping these individuals move to the next level and get where they need to get to. And let's get rid of that racism.
Well, you know, talking about getting rid of racism, thank you, Mike. You know, I'm gonna ask you all this question. What are your organizations doing to address, I don't want to use the word address, what are your organizations doing to fight and eradicate institutional racism and unconscious bias?
I can jump in on that. So we did have, even starting a few years ago, pretty extensive training on unconscious bias. We had I believe it was a Harvard professor who was brought in to help lead a lot of that. And that was really eye-opening, especially for somebody like me who does a lot of interviewing. So it was helpful to get that training, and they really rolled that out widely. Now they're looking at, you know, how diverse is our slate of candidates for every role? Are we making sure that we're interviewing diverse talent? Who's interviewing them? And are we making sure that we're thinking about this every step of the process? And then once you're within the company, Citi's done pretty extensive reviews of the pay gap across gender and racial lines. And what they found was, you know, if you normalize for people sitting in the same location at the same level, doing the same job, that we did have pay equity, which was great. But that if you remove some of those filters and just look at the median pay for, and I know you hate the word, Ty, but the way that they categorize it on the score sheet here was minority, non-minority, and female. What they actually found was females were making 74% of what males were making on a median basis, right? And minority employees were making, I think, 93 or 94% of what non-minority employees were making. So they did uncover, in that sense, some problems. And I think that's really driven by how senior are the people in these positions. You know, if you look at the leadership team, are we seeing that there's not as much diversity, and it's mostly concentrated in the lower ranks? And so there's a lot of focus at Citi right now on how do we promote diverse talent, and how do we hire in at a higher level in the company? And these are things that may take years, because, you know, if you have like a supply side problem, especially somewhere like the tech industry, you're not just going to snap your fingers and have everybody in place. It's something you have to invest in for years and years and years, and you'll continue to see the benefits as you go. So that pay gap analysis, I think, is a really major institutional piece that we're addressing. And that's something that another thing I'm happy to see the numbers published and out there, because it really holds us accountable.
Mike, thank you for sharing that. That is important, right? So it's fantastic to understand when organizations, right, small, medium, or large, are being transparent and they're asking the why, they're asking the how, right? Why do we have this problem? And then how can we really alleviate and fix this problem? Pay gap is horrible, right? And the problem is when you have the pay gap, right? Folks don't know. They just don't know, right? Unfortunately, those in HR and in senior leadership, they're a little more privy, to say the least. And I'm thinking about, right, a study that was conducted by the Corporation for Enterprise Development, right? And we talked about this offline. And that study had showed that there's a tremendous wealth gap between communities of color and our Anglo neighbors here in the United States. And it showed that for Latino families, it would take them 84 years to close the wealth gap between an average American Latino family and an average Anglo family. And for the African American community, it would take 228 years to close that gap. And that's all before the COVID-19 crisis, right? That really took the developed world, the whole world financially into depths that we'd only experienced, maybe if not, probably maybe worse than the Great Recession that we experienced in 08. So your efforts and efforts in the entrepreneurial, corporate, and even the nonprofit realm to close this gap, to not allow this, what I call transgenerational burdens, that once children, grandchildren, great grandchildren are stuck at 228 years, right? It's gracious, right? We may have flying cars by then, right? So that gap just continues to become worse as opposed to becoming better. And so let's identify this. We have another question that's virtual. Here we go. Are any of your organizations willing to work with adults trained in technical or digital arts who have physical disabilities such as vision impairment and autism?
Since I'm in tech, I don't know if that was meant for me or not, but I would love to work with anybody on those programs. So that's definitely part of what we need to consider when we look at a diverse workforce. So I'm more than happy to have that conversation.
I'll say we just added LGBT and disability-owned businesses to our supply chain diversity initiative last year. So again, that part of that journey, we're just on the beginning of that. So that's part of our baselining that we're doing right now internally at Vistra, is to identify just our employees, because I think, as you may know, a lot of times it's just hard to get people to self-identify, whether they're LGBT or they're disabled or they're veteran. We probably have a lot more in our workforce than we realize, but they haven't self-identified. So we just kind of address it as it comes up and as there's a need for it. We would definitely be open to talking to anybody and to see how we can get you engaged, get you considered. So I know at some point we may talk about the difference versus equity and equality. And that's been a real eye opener for me lately, because you think we want equal playing field. That's the goal. That's where we've always been. The problem is with the systemic and the institutional racism, that equal is not equitable. So if you have somebody who hasn't had the background and the training, but you can go a little bit further to help provide that training, then it becomes equal. So we've got to get to that point where we're providing those equitable opportunities. And we would definitely love to talk to anybody and work with you to see if there might be a way to get you to the level, or get you, or you may already be there. You may exceed everybody that's in there. We definitely want to look. I know in supply chain diversity, and the reason we have the initiative we do is that equitable approach. If we may have to look a little bit further to find the suppliers than our general network of suppliers that have always been there, that they've always known, particularly in our rural areas with our power plants. We're going to look a little bit further. And when we do, we find that we are able to identify companies that can save us money, that can drive innovation, that can get us to market quicker, because we're getting outside of that group that we were used to. But we did have to spend the money to take that extra step to find them. And I think the same thing in the D&I space with recruiting. We're going to have to identify at a younger age, start growing them and investing, as Mike said, on really getting the training for the employees that we need. We may have to start doing it, and really should start doing it at elementary age on up, even though it may be 20 years before we reap the benefits of that educated workforce that we need to come in. So that's the equitable part to get us to equality.
Equity is key. Equity is key, right? So equality, look, it looks nice on a flyer and maybe on a jersey, right? But if you don't have equity, equality is, there was a law. It was systemic racism. It was called separate but equal, right? The equal part is what those who supported that level of bigotry, right? Separate but equal. The separate really meant that it wasn't equitable, right? And it was not fair. And for us to be able to be committed and hold our leaders accountable. And yes, I'm saying that on record, to hold our leaders accountable and even maybe have compensation, executive comp correlated to your diversity and inclusion and equity results. Woo. Let's see here. Let's go to another question here. So I am seeing a question online, and we're going to get to one of those questions online. But before we approach the end, I'm going to ask this question, right? So for you all, tell me this. What do you see as your role in the private sector in driving economic justice, equity, and really helping address these social inequities? Just your role. More of a leadership question.
Todd, this is Mike. You know, I think the private sector is almost more important than the public sector, because you see so many private industries, private businesses that we can make a true difference. And for me personally, once again, I think it's leading by example, and it's getting out there and, you know, talking about that message that, hey, this is what we've got to do as a business, as a city, as a state, as a nation, of pushing forward without looking back, that that there are any of these issues that go on, any of these biases, anything that we look at to maintain that and push forward. Because I can assure you that as we push forward, whether in my business or any other businesses here that are talking today, it will continue to improve. But if we continue to sweep things under the rug, or we continue to institutionalize it well, let's turn the other cheek, let's look the other way, we will continue to have these problems. So I think it's my role as a leader to stay focused on top of it and to talk to other business leaders. Hey, this is what we need to do.
Oh, Mike. Okay, leadership, right? There's an axiom that says speed of the leader, speed of the team, right? So look at, Mike, you have served as an executive for years, and you listen, you can tell us, right? I would think that you can whisper in the ears or write a letter or talk in person to mayors, to city council members, to members of Texas, of state legislatures, right? And influence their perspective about how they can change the laws and policies. But what you're doing right there, boots on the ground as a community builder, as a rainmaker, as an entrepreneur, and as an executive. So I appreciate that. Leadership is important. And so I'm interested in this here, right? So Heather, right, with Vistra and the efforts going on, right? What are you seeing in the broader industry that gives you a sense of either optimism or some concern about what's needed to really improve the quality of life and life chances for all of our communities, for all Americans?
I think going back originally to, sorry, I just had a pop-up come up. Going back originally to what you were talking about with the leadership and compensation being tied to performance, right? So one of the things we're doing now at Vistra is we're looking at baselining. Data is so important. If you're gonna work with C-speak, whether it be legislatively or at the C-suite in a corporation or executive branches of even the public sector, you really got to be able to talk the language. And at the end of the day, we're in a market-driven economy, and we know that it performs better. Companies perform better with diverse boards of directors, with diverse employees, diverse supply chains. But just saying that's different than having the data to back it, which is one of the reasons I had asked you when you were spouting off your statistics. I definitely really need that. So I'm working on collecting that data, not only from external benchmarking activities, but internally. Where are we today? How do we benchmark against that? And then how do we really move that forward? How do we continue to measure and track? And to Mike McCall's point, it's going to be long-term. It's not going to be an overnight event. It's going to take time to really enculturate it into the way that we operate. And so we're going to be looking at that. I think compensation is critical to that. I don't know if and when we will actually get there, but at some point, you also have to be careful not to drive wrong behavior, right? So in fact, when we set goals for our diverse suppliers, we do not want to have our business units go out and say, I'm just going to grab a minority, a woman, a veteran, an LGBT, a disability owned company because I've got to hit this goal or I've got to spend this dollar amount. And then it causes us to lose money. We're having to pay more for it. We really want to create those extra opportunities for finding companies that are going to drive cost savings, that are going to drive revenue generation, that are going to drive innovation. And so if we can somehow tie compensation to the drivers that get the result, which is better representation, I think that's really where we've got to strive to look at. And I think a lot of that's going to come from data, internal data that we have, as well as benchmarking data we have across other corporations to see where we are, where do we need to be, and then how do we drive the right behaviors to get to that area, to get to that goal.
I'm liking it. Yes, spot on. Data is important. And one thing I tell folks, right, and you're just right, we're not talking about quotas. And so I just want people to know, right? So we are not talking about quotas and leveraging quotas to just reach a number, right? Because that's almost the same as checking the proverbial box. It's not genuine. That's not systemic and sustainable change, right? That's really eating. I love some French fries. You can see my full cheeks, right? That's eating French fries. That's empty calories, right? Empty calories. It's not nutritious. It's not doing nothing for your body that's healthy, right? So we really want to really win the hearts and minds and then go on there and change for because this window may last for 2-3 generations, but many generations later, it may be a different category, a different segment that needs representation, that needs justice, right? So I know as things change, they remain the same, but sometimes they don't remain the same, right? So maybe my great grandchildren may see this video and say, Granddad says something like that. We need to take care of our neighbors who now in the future may have some opportunities that are passing them by. And so I'm looking to see if there's any questions coming in online, right? Okay. Oh, okay. I like this note here. It's not a question, but it's a statement, right? Thank you for a great presentation and some excellent and real food for thought, right? So I want to just give a shout out to our guests that said that, right? They're loving this content you all are giving. Let me ask this question here, right? How is your organization ensuring DE&I will work and be sustainable and long lasting?
Yep. So one thing, for me being a millennial, sometimes I'm guilty of thinking things are solved on Twitter and I just want to see statements and I want to see words. And I think what gives me hope from City is I have seen statements and words and I've appreciated that. Our CFO, Mark Mason, had a really emotional blog post talking about how he felt as a Black man watching the video of the murder of George Floyd. And I really appreciated that he was sharing that perspective and that it gets out there. But what makes me feel confident that this will be sustainable is seeing money get put behind it, right? So just in the last couple of months, we've seen City donate $10 million to charities that support Black Americans. We've seen this year, City create a fund that now has $200 million in it that focuses on women and minority entrepreneurs. Again, sorry, Ty, for using the minority word, and that those startups have to be focused on increasing access to financial capital, increasing access to housing, healthcare, the kind of things that really drive that long-term equity. And so seeing that amount of money and that amount of commitment go into it really gives me hope that this is something City is really throwing its weight behind and that it's here to stay. So that I really appreciate. I think on the flip side of that, internally, for those of us in roles like mine, we have to make sure that some of these hiring initiatives aren't going to be those empty calories that you're talking about, Ty. And that's where we are really empowered for all of us on this call to do that in our day-to-day roles and make sure that we're creating environments that are going to be supportive and are going to bring D&I to us every day.
Spot on, Mike. Thank you. And thinking about it, right? This investment that the private sector is making, a couple come to mind, right? So I won't be biased and tout the commitments my company's made, but the investments of companies such as Boeing, Nike, Comcast's committed, I understand, $100 million to invest in, working on racial justice and economic inequity, $75 million in cash, $25 million in advertisement slots. We have Nike's committed, I believe, $40 million to address racial and social justice. Boeing's recently committed $25 million on this. So, now it'd be interesting. We need to make sure that, right, that these funds are allocated, that they're allocated and dispersed to sustainable organizations. And so I'm sure there'd be some quality watchdog organizations and partners of these these corporations to make sure that these dollars are spent well. But these investments that you all are making, right? Vista, Vistra investing $10 million in HBCUs, that's exactly what's needed. And I don't want to forget our Latino, our Hispanic serving institutions, right? So we don't want to forget our brown sisters and brothers out there, right? Our API community, our indigenous Native American communities, right? And so, and we need to support those, our tribal nations, right? Because they're really struggling during the pandemic. Questions come in virtual, and it's about the pandemic, so let's get ready, right? And so it says the pandemic is disproportionately affecting racial and ethnic minority groups, communities of color, I should say, as well as people experiencing poverty. Many of these people will not be able to afford the rising costs of medical expenses. What are your companies doing to help fight this inequity?
That's a great question. And I don't know that it's one we're looking at just internally with our employee base right now. We're fortunate our CEO has a biweekly call with the entire company. We do it Facebook, our workplace live stream. And one of the things that we've talked about is there going to be any additional funding for medical expenses? Is there going to be, we actually pay for you to go get your physical every year, to have certain age-related tests done annually. And because of the pandemic, a lot of people don't want to go out and do that, right? We don't want to go to the doctor. We don't want to put ourselves in harm's way. On the other hand, we're hurting ourselves if we don't do that. Same thing with vacation. We are overworking. We are over zoomed out, right? We need to take that vacation time. So we're getting a lot of questions from our employees about, do we get extra vacation? Can we carry it over to next year? Or can we get paid for it? And can we get our payments for our healthcare visits, even though we may not have them? And our CEO came on and said, we, again, want to drive the right behavior. You need to take care of your health. Do it wisely. We've created ways that you can have the virtual doctor. So you can have your physical now online to make sure that the things that you're doing, we've got a medical clinic that's set up at one of our facilities that you schedule your time to go in. So it's not in an area where there's a lot of people with COVID you're susceptible to that. You're going in with a set up time with masks and all the proper precautions for it. So in PTO, he's saying, take it. Just even if it's a staycation and you just shut your computer off for the day, don't do a Zoom meeting all day, just take your time. So again, going back to driving that right behavior, even though we think we may want to not be doing it right now and put it off, we need to be doing it, taking care of our health, taking care of our mental health by just taking time off. So we need to find new ways to do that. And in our company at Vistra, that's what our C-suite is encouraging. Continue to do the things you need to do to take care of yourselves. From a broader base, since we're in the electric space rather than the healthcare space, I don't know what we could do, but we are certainly open to suggestions. I know our executive commitment to this is huge. So we would love to hear any best practices on what Vistra could be doing to support a larger approach to this effort.
I will say this in regards to as we are approaching, our conclusion is that this pandemic has been devastating, right? That's an understatement. And I spend time with faith leaders and with community leaders, along with small and large business leaders, and the pandemic has really impacted our world, right? We have probably right at 20 million people across this planet who have suffered or are suffering with this virus. We have millions who've unfortunately passed away. Condolences to the families that have lost loved ones. And we still are in the quest for a vaccine and finding ways to go about and live life that's smart and safe. And it's really had a tremendous impact, a devastating impact on those who are low to modest income and also communities of color. And that suffering has been disproportionate. That is a very strong, accurate word, disproportionate. And, I am hopeful that the pharmaceutical and medical industry will come up with a vaccine and a path forward. But until then, we need to lock arms and make sure that we're being mindful of our neighbors and our friends and family members and people that we don't know across the street, across town, across the country, and even across the planet. And so thank you for your leadership in these areas and your company's leadership to really help employees not only just stay on payroll, but be able to have mental and psychological services and be able to have a sense of community, because for a lot of people, right, being in their homes, they may not have a support network. And so I just want to see, is there any thought before we close out? I have a couple notes for our audience out there. Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. McCall, any thoughts before we proceed?
Ty, just a quick note. Hey, one, I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate, you bringing this to everybody's attention, because I think it's important, very important. But I've always heard that, better cultures come from better conversations. So, we have to keep these conversations going so that everybody gets it and everybody understands it. And that, once again, it's all of our roles to make sure that happens. So I'd kind of just like to leave you with that message, because I think it's so important.
Yep. And I'm just so happy we're talking openly about these things. I was raised with the whole, like, I don't see race kind of mentality. That was like what was taught to me, that you just don't talk about these things, make sure everybody's equal, but then you don't have to talk about it. And that's the wrong way to do it. You have to acknowledge these problems. You have to talk about them openly. And so I'm really happy to see that happening. It sounds like it's happening in all of our companies. I think everybody's got a bunch of webinars and Zoom calls where we're talking openly about race and some of the impacts of things like this. And to hear topics like redlining and Jim Crow talked about in corporate America on a Zoom call is something I didn't think I would see when I was in college, right? So I think I'm encouraged by that, and I hope we keep talking openly and honestly about these things.
Wow, tremendous. And for our audience, and I agree with you fully, Mike, both Mikes and Heather. Before we close today, I'd like to definitely remind everyone to lend your voice. We need your voice. We need your participation. We have a survey that we have an initiative. It's the Bridging the Talent Gap North Texas Employer Survey. Really, on the heels of this pandemic, your input is critical in our work to improve equitable access to employer-provided educational benefits. Please be a part of this. It's really important. The deadline to participate in that survey is August 31st. So we need your participation. I want to thank our panelists, Mike Gonzalez, Mike McCall, Heather Herndon Wright. We appreciate you for joining and edifying and having a candid and thoughtful and right in a way to lean forward, that we're focusing on the act component of the listen, learn, and act. And I also want to thank our attendees. All of you are out there online. I want you to stay safe. And remember, this is our second program in the Changemaker series, only the second. Join us for our next program on Wednesday, September the 16th. Mark your calendars, September the 16th at 9 a.m. This will be a discussion on LGBTQ, sexual orientation, and gender identity in the workplace, right? The conversation will include State Representative Julie Johnson and Sergeant Jerry Satterford with the Irving Police Department, and more panelists will be announced soon. Until next time, everyone, thank you all again, and make it a 5-star day. My pleasure.
Thanks, Ty.